There's a man standing on the edge of the largest battlefield the world has ever seen. Thousands of warriors, war elephants, chariots stretching to the horizon. And in the most critical moment of his life, before a single arrow has flown, he doesn't rally his army. He doesn't strategize. He doesn't pray. He starts making a list of everyone on the other side. Their names, their strengths, their mentors, their bloodlines. Every single threat catalogued, obsessively, meticulously, as if naming them could somehow make him stronger. It didn't. It broke him from the inside out. And here's the part that should terrify you. You've been doing the exact same thing, probably this week. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You were supposed to be working, actually building, actually creating, and instead you opened a new tab. You typed their name, their company, their product page. You scroll through their latest announcement, a new feature, a new partnership, a glowing article calling them the one to watch. And something in your stomach just sank. Not because they're bad, but because some voice in your head whispered, they're ahead. So you kept scrolling. You checked their team page, counted their engineers, noticed they hired someone you interviewed last month. And by the time you closed that tab, 20, 30 minutes later, you hadn't written a single line of code, hadn't made a single call, hadn't moved your own dream forward by even 1 inch. But you could recite their entire org chart from memory. Let me tell you about Neel, 29 years old, co-founder of a SaaS startup called Onward, a project management tool he'd been building for 3 years. Neel was sharp, obsessive in the way great founders are. He could talk about user experience for hours. He genuinely believed his product could change how small teams worked. And for the first 2 years, that belief was enough. He'd code until 3 in the morning. He'd personally onboard every new user. He'd sleep on the couch in his co-working space and wake up excited. Then came Pavan. Pavan wasn't a person, it was a company. A competitor that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Same market, same audience, slicker branding. A $12 million seed round that made the tech blogs light up. And from the moment Neel read that headline, Pavan raises $12 million to reinvent team productivity, something inside him shifted. He stopped building. Oh, he'd tell you he was still building. He'd sit at his desk 12 hours a day. But if you actually watched what he did with those hours, the picture was different. He had Google Alerts set for Pavan. He had their CEO's Twitter on a separate tab, always open. He joined fake accounts on their platform to study every update, every button, every pixel. He started holding team meetings that weren't about Onward's roadmap. They were about Pavan's. Did you see they added Gantt charts? He'd say at stand-up. Their onboarding flow is cleaner than ours. They just hired a VP of sales from Slack. His co-founder Meera started noticing. His lead developer started noticing. His users, the ones who actually loved Onward, they started noticing too. Not because the product got worse, but because it stopped getting better. Neel wasn't running his race anymore. He was watching someone else's. It was a Thursday evening. Neel had just come back from a startup mixer where, predictably, all anyone talked about was Pavan. He was sitting alone at a chai stall near his old university when he heard a voice. "You look like a man who's been carrying someone else's weight." Professor Iyer, 72 years old, retired. He taught Neel strategic management in his MBA days, back when Neel was just a kid with a business plan and fire in his eyes. Neel tried to smile. Just the usual founder stress, sir. Professor Iyer sat down across from him, stirred his chai slowly, and said something Neel didn't expect. Tell me about your company. We're building a project management. No, Professor Iyer set his cup down. I didn't ask what you're building. I asked about your company, your vision, your people. When was the last time you talked about them, without mentioning whoever it is you're afraid of? Neel opened his mouth, and nothing came out, because he realized he couldn't remember. Every conversation, every strategy session, every late-night thought spiral had been framed around Pavan. What Pavan was doing, where Pavan was going, who Pavan was hiring. He hadn't talked about Onward, really talked about it, with love, with ownership, in months. Professor Iyer leaned back. There's an old story, he said, older than any business book. A king, a powerful king, with the largest army in the land, stands on the eve of battle. And instead of turning to his generals and saying, "Here is our plan, here is our strength, here is how we win," he turns to his teacher and says, "Look at them. Look at how strong they are. Look at their warriors. Look at their formation." He names them, one by one, every hero on the other side. He lists their weapons, their skill, their lineage, as if building a monument to his own fear. Professor Iyer paused. That king had every advantage: the bigger army, the stronger alliances, the throne itself. But in that moment, the moment he chose to measure himself by his enemy's roster instead of his own purpose, he had already begun to lose. Not the war, himself. What Professor Iyer described that evening comes from the opening chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, verses 2 through 6. These are the words spoken on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, as narrated by Sanjay to the blind king Dhritarashtra. Sanjay Uvacha Drishtva tu Pandavanikam Vyudham Duryodhanastada Acharyam Upasangamya Raja Vachanam Abravit Pashyaitam Panduputranam Acharya Mahatim Chamom Vyudham Drupada Putrena Tava Shishyena Dhimata Atra Shura Maheshvasa Bhimarjuna Samayudhi Yuyudhano Viratascha Drupadascha Maharatha Drishtaketush Chekitana Kashirajascha Viryavan Purujit Kunti Bhojascha Shaibhyascha Narapungava Yudhamanyuscha Vikranta Uttamaujascha Viryavan Saubhadro Draupadeyascha Sarva Eva Maharatha. The translation, in its essence. Sanjay said, seeing the Pandava army arrayed in battle formation, King Duryodhana approached his teacher Dronacharya and spoke these words. Behold, O teacher, this mighty army of the sons of Pandu, arranged by your own intelligent disciple, the son of Drupada. Here are great warriors and powerful archers, equal in battle to Bhima and Arjuna, Yuyudhana, Virat and Drupada, the mighty chariot warrior, Drishtaketu, Chekitana, and the valiant king of Kashi, Purujit, Kuntibhoja and Shaibhya, that bull among men, the courageous Yudhamanyu, the valiant Uttamauja, the son of Subhadra, and the sons of Draupadi, all of them great chariot warriors. Notice what's happening here. Duryodhana isn't asking for strategy. He isn't rallying morale. He's performing an anxiety ritual disguised as analysis. He's walking up to his own teacher, the legendary Drona, who trained both sides, and saying essentially, look at what we're up against. Look at all of them. He names warrior after warrior, not to honor them, but to feed his own spiraling insecurity. And the most revealing detail? He points out that the Pandava army was arranged by Drishtadyumna, Drupada's son, and then twists the knife by reminding Drona, your own student. It's not a military briefing, it's emotional manipulation wrapped in fear. It's a man who, despite having everything, the throne, the army, the alliances, cannot stop measuring himself against what the other side has built. Now here's where the Gita does something extraordinary, even in these early verses. We're not hearing from Arjuna yet. We're not hearing from Krishna. We're hearing from Duryodhana, the man who started this entire war because he couldn't bear to share what was never fully his. The Pandavas had been exiled, humiliated, stripped of their kingdom. They tried diplomacy. They tried patience. They asked for just 5 villages. Duryodhana refused, not because he couldn't spare them, but because the very existence of the Pandavas felt like a threat to his identity. Their talent was his insecurity. Their resilience was his accusation. Their very breath on that battlefield was proof that no matter how much he accumulated, it would never be enough, because he was always looking outward. And that exact pattern is what was eating Neel alive. Neel sat with Professor Iyer for another hour that evening. They didn't talk about Pavan once. Instead, the old professor asked him a different kind of question. When you first imagined Onward, before the funding, before the competition, before any of it, what did you see? And for the first time in months, Neel let himself remember. He saw the small business owner in Indore who'd sent him an email saying, "Your tool saved me 10 hours a week." He saw Meera's face when their first 100 users signed up. He saw the whiteboard in his old apartment, covered in sticky notes and bad handwriting, from the night the whole idea was born. That was Onward, not a response to Pavan, not a counter strategy, a thing that existed because he believed it should exist. Neel went home that night and did something he hadn't done in months. He deleted every Google alert, closed every tab tracking his competitor, unsubscribed from every newsletter that kept Pavan in his peripheral vision. And then he opened a blank document and wrote 3 words at the top. What do we believe? He didn't suddenly become a billionaire. Pavan didn't disappear. The market didn't get easier. But something shifted, something fundamental. Onward's next product update was the best they'd ever shipped, not because Neel was smarter or worked harder, but because for the first time in a long time, it was built with intention, not reaction. It was built from his own center. 2 months later, Meera told him something that made him stop mid-step. She said, "It feels like you're back." And he knew exactly what she meant. He hadn't gone anywhere physically, but he'd been gone, living in someone else's story, counting someone else's soldiers. And the army he forgot to lead, his own, had been waiting for him the entire time. So let me another quickly, honestly. You might be living this right now if you know more about your competitor's roadmap than your own customers' pain points. If you've ever changed a feature, not because your users asked, but because someone else launched it first. If the first thing you feel when someone in your space succeeds isn't inspiration, it's a knot in your chest. Or if you've been so busy cataloging everyone else's army that you forgot you have one too. Here's your Gita journal question for today. Sit with this one. What is the one thing you've stopped building or believing in because you got distracted by what someone else was building. Write it down, or even better, share it in the comments below. Not to perform vulnerability, but because sometimes naming the distraction is the first step to breaking free from it. Duryodhana named every warrior on the other side, every single one. But he never once asked himself the only question that mattered: what am I fighting for? Don't make his mistake.